The question for our next session is, what skills do employers need? You will be in the very capable hands of the British Council, and most specifically with Tracy Ferrier right at the centre of things, who's the global lead at the British Council on this very important issue. Tracy, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Welcome to this British Council session. What skills do employers really need? In partnership with City and Guilds. The British Council is the UK's international organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities. Our work in TVET aims to help transform national education and training systems, build more inclusive economies, and increase young people's opportunities. We connect policymakers, educators, and employers from around the world to tackle skills challenges and share experience and expertise from the UK skills sector. This question, what skills do employers really need, is therefore of great interest to us and those that we work with. To debate this question, we've brought together two panels, one from the education perspective and one from the employer perspective. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel members. On my right, the education panel, we have Kirsty Donnelly, Managing Director of City and Guilds from the UK. Thank you, Kirsty. Saleem Al-Habsi, Head of Language and Learning, Caledonian College of Engineering, Noman. And Zulfikar Chima, Executive Director, National Vocational and Technical Training Commission, Pakistan. And on my left, the employer panel, Helmut Schwarzel, CEO, Geberit Productions, Austria, Sabrine Rahman, Head of Corporate Sustainability for HSBC in Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Raymond Patel, CEO of Mersita in South Africa. I will start by asking the same question to each panel member. I then have a few questions which I will ask of some of the different members of the panel, and I then hope that there will be time to open up for questions from the floor. So my first question to each panel member, and I will start from this end and we'll work our way through. We are here to discuss what skills do employers really need? Why is this topic important to you and your organisation?
Okay, well, I think we've already heard this morning on a global stage why this topic is so important. It's important because we face the challenges that we face today with unemployment, youth unemployment being pretty much the highest it's ever been. And we talked again this morning, or the speakers talked this morning, about the short-termism in the planning that tends to take place. So we talk about looking at a longer term, 10 years plus out, but all of my experience tends to mean that we then come back to the short term and we tend to just then plan for the next 1 to 3 years. And because of that, it means that we're not really getting underneath understanding what the future of skills really needs. So we're talking about jobs now that we don't even know what they'll look like in 10 years' time. So I think all of this creates both an opportunity as well as a challenge for both the supply side, the education side, as well as, of course, for employers. represented here by the panel, but also many in the room, who are equally frustrated by the inability for the education, the supply side, to actually give them what it is they need. But also, I think employers, it'll be interesting to hear what our employer colleagues have got to say about this issue. Employers have got to actually get really good at being able to specify and also predict what they think they want 5-10 years down the line. So it needs to be a sort of partnership between both the education, the supply side, as well as employers, in order to do this longer term planning. But it's important for organisations like City and Guilds, which operates on a world stage. And interestingly, we don't just represent education, although I'm sitting here today on the panel doing so, we also represent the employer, the industry voice as well, because everything we do is about driving that whole purpose about helping people into the first job, on the job, and beyond into the next job. And I think if we can all keep that focus on what is it that we're trying to achieve for our young people today, as was in the declaration, that the focus here is on that really important output, that destination, and providing our young people with the aspiration that they need to be able to go and succeed and actually be able to benefit from the plethora of opportunities that are going to be available, if only we can tell them more clearly about what they're going to be.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. And Salim, why is this topic important to you in your organisation?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, today what we see in the world is really changing, and we have to cope with this change. And what's happening in UAE, and today this event, and accommodating these many people, these minds, great minds, I would say, to come to debate such important topics is a very good sign that the world is changing and the world is reshaping. So it is important for us as education organization. Before, we used to focus on what is called just knowledge. But today, the world is changing. So the focus is not just on the knowledge and bombarding, let us say, youth with knowledge, but also there is the skill. The skill is needed to be equipped. So this gathering is very important to us to see and to listen from others. How do they look at the skills? And what skills are really needed after graduating, let us say, from institutions? So hopefully, this gathering for these few days would help us a lot in order to gather lots of ideas in order how to reshape the future into a different perspective, not just from the perspective of knowledge, but from the skills point of view.
Thank you very much, Salim. The same question?
Okay. Well, what skills employers really need, but what is more important is, of course, that the employers are not getting the skills they really need. There is a gap, there is a mismatch, there is a disconnect, which is the biggest problem or the challenge. It's not only my country, but all the third world countries are facing. And this mismatch or the gap is resulting in unemployment, low productivity, sluggish economic growth, and social deprivation. There is inability or failure on the part of all the three stakeholders, the training providers, the employers, and the government also. So we'll have to identify the reasons for this gap. On what are the failures on the part of training providers? Lack of vision, lack of a formal mechanism of coordination with industry, lack of funding, and they have not been able to evolve a culture of job market analysis. And in the third world countries, insufficient and substandard training institutes. And last but not the least, their curricula is also generally outdated. The flaws on the part of the industry is that they have failed to realize, at least in the third world countries, to realize the importance and usefulness of TVET, Technical and Vocational Training and Education. And some of the employers, they want to keep their their wanted skills secret because they want to maintain a monopoly on some of the manufacturing goods. And of course, lack of coordination between industry and the training providers. And on the government side, misdirected priorities and bureaucratic red tapeism are the major reasons why they have not been able to bring the two sides together. In my view, there has to be someone to bridge the gap, and later on when you ask me, I would share my views about the solution also.
Thank you. And Helmut, just to remind us, we're here to discuss what skills do employers really need? Why is this topic important to you and your organization?
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here, especially as Austrian, you know. We had the election last night, and 31, we have heard on the last panel, is our Prime Minister in the future. So maybe he has done the right thing. Yeah? And in a company, we have to do the right thing too. And to be successful in this very challenging time we live, you need the right people. And how do you get the right people? We have heard that the systems, education systems, almost in every country have to be reformed to challenge these changing times we have. So I think we all as stakeholders have to do something to get the right people and the right skills. And especially in Austria, we have a really successful system with the apprenticeship system. And I have to say, when we didn't have decided 20 years ago to educate our young people in our company, I wouldn't exist anymore with my company in Austria. So this is really a question of strategy and one of the most important issues.
Thank you very much. And Sabrine, why is this topic important to you and your organization?
Thank you for having me. So for those who may not have heard of HSBC, we're the world's largest financial organization with about 200,000 employees across 60 markets. So having the right skill set and a pipeline of talent is of critical importance to our success. To put it very simply, why are we interested in developing skills, developing young people? As I said, it's key to our success, but more importantly, the core skill set that we as an organization look for is actually emotional intelligence. It's about learnability, it's about adaptability, it's about resilience. As many of my colleagues have mentioned, the careers of the future, many haven't actually emerged as yet, and we don't know what our children will need to do in the future, but what we do know is that they need to be adaptable. And that's why HSBC invests in core programs around future skills, around entrepreneurship, because we work with partners such as the British Council to ensure that we develop robust programs that are localized yet international enough that we can work with not only our partners but also the education sector and really contribute to policy and educational reform.
Thank you very much. And Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. For me, what employers are really looking for is, one is to actually put the employer into perspective. And an employer has a dual responsibility or a dual imperative. The first being an economic imperative to ensure that your business is profitable. And profitability would depend on the kind of people you employ. The second is a social imperative. What is your contribution to society, and how do you improve that community or society that you come from? Therefore, looking at that, we're looking at employing a flexible, adaptable, less supervised individual. So, is our education system responsive enough for something like this? Do we design our education system and our curriculum to give you a candidate that is boxed, or is it possible to adapt the person over a period of time, a kind of life design that has to be built in right from the beginning. With the rapid emergence of change and a disruptive nature in business, it is so important that we get the right person. The curriculum change in our education system is much slower than what the market is changing. So for me, we've got to make sure that our education system is most certainly transformed, and the transformation happens at a much quicker pace. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to each panel member for, I think, really helping to set the scene. I'm now going to ask one or two of you some more specific questions. My first question is that there are some slightly different perspectives on what the main drivers should be for the sort of content and delivery of TVET. There's a view that industry should be the main driver over absolutely everything else. There's maybe an alternative view that the needs of learners are most important. So I suppose my question is, what should be the main driver for TVET, and how do the needs of employers and the needs of learners fit into this? Could I perhaps start with you, Kirsty?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, really, because it forces out a sort of a, do we have to choose? And I don't think we can choose as to whose role is more important between the employer or the education system. I think what's the main driver? The main driver's surely got to be the destination, surely got to be the output that we're trying to drive out, which ultimately is landing young people in good roles that they can aspire and progress. So clearly the role of the employer in being able to, as I said earlier, to be able to translate their needs and requirements in a way that the education system can then properly respond to in a timely way, to Raymond's point, much faster, looking at different models in different ways. I don't think we can ignore the role of digital. I know that we don't ignore it now. I know that it is much more embedded in education and, of course, in employment, but there is still a long way to go if we think about the role that can play to try and enhance the adaptability and the speed issues and the pace that we've just talked about. But for me, the focus has got to be on sorting this oxymoron out that we've got, which is people without jobs and jobs without people. So that's got to be the absolute motivator. I do think that Sabrin picked up on a really interesting point around, I would translate it almost as resilience. I think that we've got to get much better at combining into TVET programs, not just the technical training, but also those other attributes, almost the resilience, the employability skills, the project skills. Many of the employers that we speak to, both on a global stage, but also back in the UK, are actually saying, actually, they're the skills we want you to most focus on in the education system. We'll almost worry about the technical skills once a young person actually gets here, but can you actually try and give us young people who are ready for the world of work? So I think getting that bridge right between the world of education into the world of work is probably one of the most important things that we've got to put some more focus on.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. So we've heard from the sort of education perspective. Helmut, would you like to respond to sort of Kirsty's remarks and maybe comment on how you see the main drivers for technical education and training?
In my opinion, there has definitely be an alignment between education institutions and companies, of course. In between, we have, of course, the people with their talents. So, and this we have to solve. On the one side, you have the talent. On the other side, we have the need, the demand from the companies. And the education system should be able to get this on the path, so that we get the people with their talents, of course. And the demand is making, of course, the company, because I would say, as a production manager, for instance, when I don't produce the right product, I cannot sell it. And the same is it with the education system. The client, of course, are the young people, the youth, but they have to develop in the direction where they have chances to earn the living. Otherwise, you end up in unemployment,
Yep.
as we have 30% in youth. So this is the fact that education systems, as you said, are too slow in adaptation, and the reforms are too slow, especially teachers have the problem that they have not the connection to the practice and cannot teach things that people really need in the practice. So there's also a gap we have to close. We need proficient teachers. We need innovative curricula. But this needs changes in the institutions and also in the political thinking. In Austria, for instance, education is a political thing. Yeah? Parties are fighting. Yeah? It's a thing of power, and that's definitely the wrong way.
Yeah.
We have one client, and these are our young people, and our young people are the future.
Thank
So
you.
we have to change a lot.
Well, that's a good provocative remark for me to perhaps pass over to Zulfikar as a representative of government who's very much focused on developing vocational education and training in Pakistan and working with industry. It'd be good to get your perspective on those remarks.
Yes, you asked about we should drive the TVET system. Of course, there can't be two opinions. It is the employer or the industrial sector which should be on the driving seat, and steering should be in the hand of the employer. As in the developed countries we see, the entire TVET sector is industry-led. So we have learned this lesson, and we have also taken a few measures in Pakistan, and I would like to share with the August House. Number one, we have discarded the outdated system of final assessment of technical training, and now in the final assessment comprised of 90% practical tests, and 2 out of 3 examiners are from industry. We are trying to involve industry. Number 2, we have established sector skill councils, and these councils are comprised of prominent industrialists. Each council have a technical committee, and the main function and role of these committees are to review and update the curriculum of all trades, and they keep on updating the curricula after every 6 months. And 3, we have established institute management committees. These committees are also comprised of industrialists. So this is how we are trying to formalize the role of industry. And we have been successful in evolving industry's role in each and every step. So now they have a role in curriculum development, they have a role in training delivery, they have a role in final assessment, and they have a role in the placement of finally the graduates, the trainees. So Sialkot is one of our cities which is known for manufacturing surgical goods, sports goods, and leather goods. The football which is used in the World Cup is manufactured in Sialkot. Now I had a meeting with the Chamber of Industry in Sialkot, and we also invited the heads of training institutes there. And it was decided that the training would be imparted, or those skills would be provided to the youth of that city which are needed by the local industry. So the training is going very successfully, and the local industry's needs are being met by the training institutes of that city. So this is how we can formalize or ensure a proactive role of industry.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask a question of Sabrine and then Raymond. What would you like educators to do to sort of best help prepare young people for jobs, not just now, but jobs for the future?
I think I could answer that in two main points. One is to involve employers and the private sector at the start of your curriculum planning journey. I think often we're approached when it's too late and almost asked of our opinion as a band-aid solution. And I think that is really missing the point. The private sector have a variety of skills that can be leveraged by the educational sector to help curriculum reform be constructive and productive. And I think that disconnect is quite an opportunity missed. And the second thing I think that we would like to see is just the focus on creativity. I think with the advent of artificial intelligence and digitization, I think we are focusing sometimes too much on skills that could be replaced in the future. But what can't be replaced is empathy, creativity. These are attributes in humans that can never be replicated by robots. And that is what I feel is missing. When I see young graduates, young millennials join our organization, they are fantastic from a technical perspective, but you ask them to creatively solve a problem and they don't know how. And I think one of the biggest issues for us in the future is as roles change within organizations is how do we retain people who don't have the skill sets to adapt. So that would be my plea to all the educators out there. Give students and young people a chance to be creative, to think laterally, because these are skill sets that are sorely needed in the private sector.
Thanks very much, Sabrine. And Raymond, what would you like to see educators doing to prepare young people for jobs now and in the future?
I think the first thing, and I want to start where Sabrine ended off, it's about innovation research. I'm very firmly of the belief that our young people are very innovative. But the innovation outstrips the knowledge of the lecturer or the teacher. The kind of way people access information is very different to you doing a Dewey research. There's Google. And because our teachers are not up to it, they lag behind. And instead of trying to catch up, we then get onto stifling innovation in education and development. So that's the first one. The second one is we've got to collaborate. The world is actually so big, so small is it what you think it is. The collaboration is so imperative that we've got to work with each other. And teachers have to start looking at best practice. How can we best get that to that? The third one is education authorities, universities in particular, our technical colleges, are still caught up in an archaic way of thinking. What we do is train people for now. We're not looking at training people for tomorrow. We're still caught up in the first industrial revolution, then the second revolution, which is the energy revolution, and some of us are still thinking that the computer revolution is coming, not realizing that Industry 4.0 is a total different revolution. It's about data. How do we begin to collect data, and how do we use that data for future? So for me, it's your education institutions has to transform, has to understand its role in the future rather than its role currently.
Tracy, can I just sort of, I think there's a...
Yes, no, I was hoping that you and then Sleem could perhaps respond to those comments.
Because I think there's some really, really important points there. I mean, I think the first thing I'd say, and I'm not in any way trying to do this to blame governments, but we've talked about the role of employers and the role of education institutions. And we touched a little bit on some work that's going on at a government level in Pakistan, but I do think we have to look to what governments are doing with the speed of the reforms and funding. So for me, policy and funding are two of the other levers that, unfortunately, I'm not using that as an excuse, but the reality is the wrong levers within policy and funding often do get in the way of some of the problems that I think, you know, you've just been talking about, particularly Sabrina and Raymond. But so it's what can we do to address that? We can't just sort of sit back and let that happen, but it's how do we collaborate to actually try and encourage our governments to fund TVET, particularly in a way that, you know, we've seen greater levels of funding for HE. So how do we create that parity of esteem when the funding and the policy doesn't necessarily exist to create that parity of esteem? So I don't think we can ignore the very important role of that in the ecosystem as part of how we respond to it. And I do think it's really important that education in its broadest sense is involved right at the beginning of the curriculum design. I'm not entirely sure sector skills councils are always a proxy for that. I think we actually have to get industry absolutely right involved in that design, industry who really understand their industry, not necessarily representatives of that industry.
Thank you. And Salim.
Yes, actually, I would like to say something. When we talk about, let us say, getting employers to be involved, this is not the only way. It is not enough to involve employers. We need to look into the education as a holistic system, starting from earlier schools. Because if we take an example, in Gulf countries, almost students spend 12 years in schools. When they come to the tertiary level, for how long they stay there? Almost 4 years. So at the end, we find employers are not satisfied about the outcome, whereas the education institutions have to satisfy many stakeholders: employers, students, parents, and the government. And we need to understand or something. I will just to add to this the point. When we look at the majority of education institutions in each country, what is the percentage of the education institutions running under the umbrella of government and funded by government? They are self-funded. So sometimes they find difficulty in order to cope with all the demands and all the skills needed, and the quality outcome is expected by the employers. So as a solution could be, there are gaps we need to close. We need to close the gap between general education and TVET education. This is very important. When it comes to higher education, we have a ministry, let us say Ministry of Higher Education, which from my point of view works in isolation from the Ministry of Education itself. So Ministry of Education, this is a complete one entity, and then there is a gap when it comes to higher education, and then also we have a third party, which is the employer, and in between the general education. So what, from my point of view, I feel there should be boards, includes people from education, includes people from higher education. That is, in case if it is not possible to have one ministry for education and let this education melt in one ministry instead of we have isolated ministries, one for education, one is for higher education, one is TVET, and all these things. Because at the end, we'll end up with different points of view.
Yep, great.
So if we have like this, I think this can be one of the solutions where we can head towards one goal that we would like to achieve. One more point I would like to mention, just to throw all these things to education institutions, I don't think it's the right thing, but also we need to include those outside bodies. Like I can give you an example. Last year we ran a project in Oman, which was the first time run in the Oman, which was the Taqaddum. And Taqaddum in Arabic means move forward. That program dealt with provoking the skills in youth. And it was a very successful program. So it looked into looking at the students and letting students themselves explore the areas of strength and then build on. And it was a very successful program. So we also, as I said before, we request all these bodies to come together and, as I said, education, higher education, and get also some people involved from employers at the extent to requesting employers also to be part of designing the curriculum itself, to be part of saying and agreeing on the skills needed. Because when we talk about education and you say, for example, here are lots and lists of endless of skills cannot be addressed. But once we come upon and agree on them, some certain and very important skills that need to be addressed, definitely. And as I said at the beginning, this is a very big sign of that we are all willing to reform the education into a better destination.
Thanks very much, Suleiman. I think it's very interesting that you've mentioned sort of TVET, general education, then you've got the ministries and then education. I think it sort of illustrates how complex it can be, particularly in certainly some of the countries that we operate in. There are a number of ministries that you need to work with who are relevant to education and to TVET, and then you add in the different industry ministries as well. And I think it just shows the sort of challenge really that we all face. I'd like to build on those comments and perhaps start by asking Raymond what relationship between employers and education and training institutions do you think will deliver the best results for learners?
Tracy, I actually want to bring this point home, that our focus in workplaces, or rather on panels, is about new entrants into the workplace, young people. Yet we forget the current workers who are there. And some of the current workers needs more transformation and more learning than our workers who are entering the workplace. Back home in South Africa, we've got a saying, and I want adds up to what Salim is saying, which is the point he makes on a holistic approach towards human capital development. And we say that every workplace is a training space, because it's about continuous lifelong learning. And we've got to bring that in. And I think that, for me, whether you're a new entrant, fresh from TVET or college or university, or whether you're an old worker, we have to inculcate, or engrave rather, the concept of lifelong learning for every worker in the workplace.
Thank you. Helmut?
Yes. I want to continue because I think in Austria we have a really good successful system, so-called dual system of apprenticeship, where young people at 15 go to the company and learn at the company, and besides they have above 20% training at education institutions. And this works really very, very well. We have 40% of our young people at the age of 15 that goes in this direction. They earn money from 15 of age. Yeah? They learn in the practice, they get insights in the companies, and we have the possibility to influence what skills they are trained in. So we train in the right direction for us we really need. And on the other hand, they get the theoretical know-how and soft skills and so on in the education institutions. So I think this is a real good working system, and I can tell you, just try it. We have the same system, I think, similar is in Germany and in Switzerland, but that's all. And we try to export it, for instance, to China. Some companies try to implement this in China or in Mexico. But this works really, really well. Our youth unemployment rate is lower than 10%. And one point, which is necessary too, before these young people decide in which direction they go, they need orientation. Yep. And we discuss in Austria now very deeply how can we give people orientation at the age of 13 to 14, because in the curricula there's nothing to give them orientation in what professions there are, and business administrations and all these things. They need to decide in which direction they should go. And this is 1.2, that we should focus on to give orientation at the right time in life, that they choose the right jobs and invested the time for their future.
Thank you. Could I perhaps pass this question to Zulfikar, and then I'll come to Kirsty. So, Zulfikar, perhaps considering your perspective in Pakistan, what relationship would you like to see between employers and education and training institutions to best deliver results for learners?
As I already stated, that of course there is a gap, there is a mismatch, there is a disconnect, but this gap has to be filled, it has to be bridged, and it is the government which has to come forward and bridge this gap. But I would definitely say that there are different perspectives. For the developed countries, they have a different perspective. For the developing countries, they have a different perspective. There, the conduct of industry is different. They are less enthusiastic or less interested in the quality of their manufacturing goods. So they are less interested to have highly skilled workforce. That is also one of the reasons. So they have less realization about the usefulness and importance of entire TVET sector. So we have to motivate them. We have to make them realize the importance of highly skilled workforce. And this role can be played, of course, none else but by the government. And we are trying to play this role. We are trying to bridge the gap between employers and the education or the training providers. And we have been successful in that. As I shared, by establishing sector skill councils, we have different councils we have a different sector skill council for construction, we have a different council for hospitality, for engineering, for services, for textile, etc., etc. And there we have a very sizable representation of industry, of the employers. And they have started playing their role. Now they have come forward, but previously their attitude was lukewarm. They were not as enthusiastic, but now they have started playing their role. So I would certainly say that government should bridge the gap.
Thank you. And Kirsty?
Yeah, I'll be very brief, but just sort of remind us that we're talking here about what will deliver the best results for learners. And I think Helmut touched on what we would call apprenticeships when you talked about your dual system. And it's very rare for me to speak in a conference and not to have mentioned the word apprenticeships at any point. So I'm very glad that you gave us that lead, because apprenticeships, of course, are something in the UK that go back, to the 15th century. They're not new, but of course, going back to the point we're making about the role of government and policy, they have been meddled with an awful lot over the years, over the centuries. I'm pleased to say the UK now, and specifically in England, but does have a real focus back on apprenticeships. I think the important point there is, though, to still have choice. I don't think apprenticeship should be about choosing a work-based route over and above choosing an HE route. We should look for ways that those routes can be intertwined. So going back to one of Raymond's earlier points about lifelong learning, young people still have aspiration to be able to do work-based apprenticeships, earn and learn, but still go on to higher levels of training and learning, including HE as an embedded part of that, if that's what they also want. So I do think that's part of the system is incredibly important. And for me, choice has got to be at the heart heart of it. And the other point I think Helmut raised was the woeful lack of careers advice and guidance that exists pretty much in most and every country that I get to talk to. So if we don't get that right at the beginning, if we don't have role models coming out of situations like WorldSkills, then we're never going to be able to address that. And I think for me a really big part of that is how can we agree what those common standards and credentials are so that people on those apprenticeships can be portable, so they can go whether they're working for a particular hotel group today in UAE, or they're going to America or to South Africa. There's an opportunity for them to take that portable apprenticeship standard with them. I think that's really important, and I think that's the job of us, both employers and educators, with policy, government policy at the heart of it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time to take questions. So what I'd like to do is to ask Sabrine to have the final word on the employer side, and to give you this opportunity to perhaps have one plea or one thing that you would really like to see from education and training in the future.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. So look, just to sort of sum up what I've said, and I think coming from, I guess, a services sector, it is different from manufacturing or other industries which require a lot more technical skill sets. It really comes down to having young people who are willing to give things a try, who are able to deal with setbacks, who are able to communicate effectively and to market their skills. It doesn't matter what skills you have, if you are able to practice lifelong learning, if you are able to walk into different sectors, I think unemployment is an issue that can be tackled very effectively. So from an employer perspective, just to develop young people who do have those skill sets, and the program that Salim spoke about, Taqaddum, is actually the brainchild of HSBC and British Council. We developed this 4 years ago. It's active across 7 markets, and we are looking to expand it. But it was really our practical way of enhancing and promoting the skill sets that employers look for. So I would encourage you all to research a little about the program, and please come back to us if you are interested in taking it back to your countries.
Thank you very much. And Salim, I'd like to give you the final word from our education panel, and maybe one plea or one thing you'd like to ask of employers.
Actually, I would like to ask employers to always be part of the education system, and not just to wait and look at it as a kind of transactional relationship between the education and employers. There should be a relation where both work together and start thinking how to reshape education. And maybe the difficulty or the message I would like to send to government maybe is, once we talk about the slow change in curriculum and slow response, that is because the reason education is working under very restrict framework. So also it's a kind of mindset change, which may take time. But this makes me very optimistic and really feel very happy, because all the gathering here, and once you see all these youth outside working very hard in a very enthusiastic way, it means we are fine and we are there. And inshallah, the world is going to change into better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think we could have had better words to finish this panel discussion. I'd like to thank all of the panel members. I'd like to thank our partner, City and Guilds. I'd like to thank the conference organisers and WorldSkills International, and also thank all of you for listening. And I hope that we've done something small to try and bridge the gap and bring employers and educators together. So thank you very much. Thank you.